We're already a little late here and probably need to start. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you that you are present with us. Thank you that you continue to speak to us, even as we look to you, Jesus, and as we seek to listen to you, even through one another. Help us to have ears to hear. In your name, amen. Before we actually kind of start, we usually don't do any kind of evaluation of classes. But let's talk just briefly here. How, for those of you who have been here, and even if you've only been to a few of the sessions, how's this been going? How, have you learned anything? How's it been going for you? I know, caught you in the middle of eating here.
I've only been a couple of times, Stan, but it forces me to come out of just your bubble that you live in, kind of thing, and evaluate, what you're doing and what you see and what you feel and sometimes apathy is just as bad as and so it's good for me that I've enjoyed and given me lots of things to think about and pray about. And so I appreciate it. Not always enjoyed it. I mean, I've enjoyed it, but I appreciate it. Thanks.
You're talking about this class?
Yeah, this class, this 6-7 week class.
I'm wondering if any of the.
Makes me think sometimes the things you just do automatically, you don't know what the background is. I was talking to Brenda the other day about these cliches and sayings we have that have a history. We don't know what that history is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's racially motivated, but we don't use it that way. It's just, that's where it came from. And my son-in-law, I said something one time, even he's Native American. And I said something about, I was done with something and I was the last person there. But I used the last dog was hung, was the phrase. I'd heard it all my life, off and on, but I didn't know.
What was the phrase?
Until the last dog is hung.
Oh.
And I didn't know what that, it just to me meant you're all done. But there's a reason why that statement was there. And he told me, what it was. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. But it made me aware of stuff that, and this class is making me aware of maybe I should be looking at more carefully about that kind of thing. I'll never say that sentence again.
So we have 6, 7 today. We've averaged between 7 and 10. Does that say anything to us?
It's raining.
It's raining.
Move the refreshments up here.
Is it I don't think it's too unusual for normal study. Is it about the same?
We've had some that are much bigger.
Yeah.
And I think even the Bible studies, I think, are bigger than this. I would guess this is one of the smallest section groups. So we need to think about some of those things.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting that it's also been viewed online a little bit more too. So it kind of makes me think that people are kind of looking in, after the fact. So, that not so much people joining us on Zoom,
Yeah.
but like looking at YouTube
Later
on.
Yeah.
And, I don't know exactly, it could be a combination of different reasons for that, but that does interest me. And I think definitely the subject matter is, it's hard.
Right.
I think that is part of it. I think everybody even, I think we've all been challenged, right, at some level.
Moves you out to the comfort level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we want to start here. I'm going to skip some of these things. I'm going to go a little different than you have printed in front of you. So this is the last of the sessions. And it's going to focus on a couple of different things. Using a book, what is it, the Good White Racist, one of the chapters looks at the church as a whole, and then it goes on to kind of what's next. But as we look at the church, it's interesting, Transfiguration Sunday and Jesus on the mountain. As we think about Jesus, a very simple question, who did he associate with? Well, we kind of know that. Who did he associate with?
Sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors.
All of those who were in some way or another disassociated with the rest of the communities. What about the church today? How does the church, who does the church associate with? That's a little harder.
We do it sort of like the mission committee does some things, other committees do various things. It's more of an outreach kind of thing, but I don't feel that that's coming in, people coming into church worship, but there is an outreach.
Okay, so sometimes in the outreach, we might reach out to those who Jesus would associate with. And it isn't, and I'm not saying that the church should be filled with those that society rejects. But it is a question that we might need to ask ourselves once in a while. Let's ask a little different question. So we have charity and we have justice. How do we define charity? How do we define charity?
Okay, find a Valentine that needs another heart.
What is charity?
Well, how big?
I know another church calls it charity, and where we say love, so I don't know if that's, I've never looked up the definition of charity.
Charity and love connected. Okay. So would charity be more of the giving of our resources to those in need? Is that charity? I think I would.
Paul talks about that, James talks about that,
Mhm,
your good works, so glorify the Father in heaven.
mhm.
It also comes from grace, right? Yeah, here's charity can be a reflection of what the giver thinks the receiver needs.
Can be a reflection of what the giver thinks the receiver needs. That's a little different take on that. But what is justice? How do we define justice?
And why is that topic way more prevalent in the Old Testament than it is in the New Testament?
So you think justice
like,
is more
I'd say
prevalent?
5, or if you just look in your concordance and look up the word justice, I'd say it's 5 or 6 times, maybe 7 times more spoken of in the Old Testament than in the New Testament.
And who speaks about it in the Old Testament?
And God does usually.
Well, the prophets. And the prophets speaking for God, are proclaiming that word of God. So how do we define justice then? And another question, I guess. Do we as a church, and as a larger church, so not just individual here, are we involved in justice? Or are we involved in charity?
think in the official sense, in terms of what we do, where money goes, we're involved in works of charity.
We're involved in works of
I
charity.
would say so, yeah. I mean, when I think of justice, I think of fairness, equity, I guess, would be another word that comes to mind.
Mhm.
Inclusiveness somehow works its way in there too somehow. And it has to do more with policy, maybe. It has to do with opportunity. It has to do with systems.
Systems.
I mean, there's individual justice, obviously.
Mhm, mhm.
But,
There's an old story, I've read it a number of times now, different books, of this village living near a river, and a body comes floating down the river, and they take it out of the river and they bury it. And a proper funeral for it. But day after day, there's a body that comes down, or there's more than one body that comes down. And day after day, they do that, the same thing, this village. But they never find out why the bodies are in the river in the first place. They don't go, I mean, they don't deal with that issue. They're simply burying the bodies in a proper burials. Is the church more interested in charity than in justice, which is, yes, dealing with so often the reasons for the problems in this world? Is the church more interested in charity versus justice?
Well, I think they do more charity, but I think they're interested in justice. Justice is harder to do. Justice takes, it makes people more uncomfortable. Charities are easy to be charitable. I mean, everybody feels good about being charitable.
Mhm.
But it's harder. And then sometimes justice can be hard to find, get people on the wrong side of it. People feel like, you know, it's a harder egg to crack, so to speak.
It's a harder egg to crack, is definitely so. And you made a statement early on in that charity makes us feel good. Makes us feel good. Justice make us feel good. No,
I think deep down, it makes us feel like we're making a difference. It doesn't always feel good.
Well, I was thinking of the threefold office of Christ, you know, prophet, priest, and king.
Mhm.
And that justice seems to fall a little more in the prophetic role, whereas if we think of charity, if we think of the root of charity as being grace, right, or gift, that has a little different. I don't know if charity has some sort of a transactional feel to it, or kind of a, you know, us to them or something, maybe as we think about it in English. But if we think about it as an expression of grace, that seems to be more of a priestly role, perhaps, you know, and that's a little easier to engage in, I think, on some levels than the work of justice.
With justice, I think you take a risk. It's not, you take a risk of the other side not respecting what you're doing. So it's not like, as people have said, with charity, we give. But with justice, we risk our lives basically to take a stand. In the church, it's difficult in the church because we risk losing members. We risk people not going to that church because of the stand they take. So I don't think there's as much of a risk in charity to look at differences.
Yeah. Charity is much easier to do than justice, dealing with the system that creates the problems. And yes, there is definitely a risk. It's hard.
A friend was sharing with me that they were doing some of the offering, and he made a sort of an offhand comment, kind of in the moment about, you know, God may be accepting in some of these, some of these gifts might have been ill-gotten or something like that, you know, and didn't mean anything in particular by it. But afterwards, a wife of one of their members who's had made his money as an attorney representing chemical companies, you know, over the years, was offended, thinking that he was, you know, my friend was calling out, you know, maybe this person or something like that. He didn't have anything in mind at all.
Mhm.
But you know, that's kind of like, you know, there are certain things we might talk about, like say eco-justice or something like that, and it's gonna set off all kinds of
Yeah.
alarms. Or even this conversation, quite honestly, too. I think for some, it's like, why would the church talk about race?
Mhm.
You know, as if this is not a topic we should be involved in.
I mean, we need to be a little careful. I mean, obviously, good works, we're called to do that. You
Yeah.
can't elevate one over the other. I think there's a tendency to latch onto one thing and somehow push that one thing. But I mean, we are called to do good works. We are called to justice. And it's just as easy to get self-righteous about one as it is about the other. And, you know, so I think you kind of have to watch your own narrative and your own motivation. And
Mhm. In my last congregation, a large congregation in Des Moines, Washington, we had mission trips that went to many different places around the world. And oftentimes, many times a year, those trips were going. And I was head of that. Each of those, so we sent people to Haiti and Guatemala and El Salvador and Uganda and Jamaica, at least 5. I think there were probably even more than that. Each of those areas had a leader, a lay person who was kind of in charge of that area. And I worked with those people. And especially trying to understand, why are we going to those places? What are we trying to accomplish? The question here, charity can reflect what the giver thinks the receiver needs. And we looked at some books that really focused upon who's getting the benefit from our trips. And that's a hard challenge for congregations, especially that are involved in mission organizations, in reaching out, sending mission groups abroad. Why do we do that? It makes us feel good. We learn a lot. But is there something more that needs to happen? So the issue of charity on one hand and justice on another. And I think justice is the hard part of doing things. I think most of the mainline churches, many of the mainline churches, I don't know about most, have organizations that work in the government to try to deal with some of those justice issues. But the rest of the church is kind of, we don't even know what they're doing. We have no idea what those organizations are doing. Does Presbyterian have it? Lutherans did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's usually a smaller percentage of people that have an idea of what, you know, some
Yeah.
sense of what's
Yeah.
going on. Because if they have an interest where they're going to follow it.
Mhm.
And I want to throw in what the Mattson share.
Yeah, you have to follow that.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure where this part is, so they may have to chime in, but is this where the total body of Christ comes in? Some may have different foci in regards to justice and charity with the rest of the body. supportive of that? Or are we all called to do all of it? So yeah, is it something that we all kind of take on and,
Okay, so how do we do that? Is something we're supposed to all be doing? Doesn't seem like it.
yeah, I just gonna throw in just because, you know, we had a conversation reading this book, I don't know how long ago, it was well before we decided we're gonna have a class.
Mhm.
And Stan and I were having this very conversation about because in the book, she talks about her church, feeling like her church did charity well, but not justice.
Mhm.
And that really kind of sat with me, you know, and I was like, yeah, I think there's some truth to that. You know, part of it, I think, depends also on calling and everything, you know, as well. And anyway, that's just kind of sitting, you know, around in my head, and then participating in this work up in Juneau, you know, I saw sort of firsthand this justice work, you know, and all that's kind of involved in it. And then from that, a sense of like, well, here's something that maybe we can do. So there's a sense of maybe calling. I think we should all, you know, have awareness in things. And I feel like part of my role in it is like, there's the work that like Nancy and Bonnie and I are doing, or starting at least, you know, with the Southeast Alaskan tribes that there's the work and conversation that happens in that setting of trying to, you know, talking about boarding schools and, you know, just the terrible legacy, and then how that gets translated into some of the conversation that might take place when I put my more pastoral hat on, in terms of, you know, trying to bring people, you know, to an awareness. Even from like the sharing they did at with the potluck that we had a couple weeks ago, that seemed to open some people's eyes to some things like, wow, I didn't know that. So in other words, I think there's a sense of justice work that can become more accessible to people in ways that are not, you know, not everybody wants to go out and, you know, I don't know, hold a sign or something like that, or, you know, participate in a sit-in or whatever it might be.
Well, so you were confronted with a situation new to you. You came there kind of innocently in one sense as moderator, and then all of a sudden there's a door that kind of opens up and you kind of see the potential and you enter it. And in a sense, I think about Jesus kind of the same way. I don't know that he went out looking for lepers and prostitutes. They were just there, you know, and he was confronted with that situation in that time. And I think, you know, when it comes to, well, how do we use our time and should we go out and equip ourselves? I think there is a little sense, maybe it's time to try it, but bloom where you're planted. You know, deal with in front of you right there. And
I guess the
and
challenge I would make with that is, I think we have blinders on to what's in front of us.
Yeah.
So
That is what the issue is with the church. Are we just blind to what's right there in front of us? Here in this congregation, we have two tribes on either side of us. And we don't know anything about them. And three tribes, really. We don't, they're right there. And we don't know. Have we closed our eyes to see what's in front of us? That's the question I have of the church as a whole. Because I agree with that he didn't go out looking for them. They were there, but he had eyes, Jesus had eyes to see what was there. And they came to him. So that's the issue here. But let's go on to another issue here. So the book, Good White Races, talks about whiteness. What is whiteness? How do we begin to understand what that is? What is whiteness for us?
Better help us out, Brenda.
Well, I'm just getting emotional.
Mhm.
There was an incident last week with the basketball teams, the 7th and 8th grade. And we thought we overcame the racism but the Nia Bay team went to another town close by. And Nia Bay has some good players out there, obviously, and Nia Bay won. Well, a mom and her daughter walked out, after the game to leave, and they were called every name in the book, racist, really bad. And I was surprised that this mom didn't jump the gal because I'm scared of her. I was gonna tell her that, because she's tough with her words, but she composed herself and, moved on instead of lashing back, and didn't fall into that. And, she was guided to go report it, and hopefully she will. But, in the outside world, we always call it living on the reservation, we call it living on the reservation, and in the outside world. And I didn't realize that it was different until I moved away. Like, how can it be different? People are people, but they're not. We are treated different. And it's sad, but I think that doing this is making progress, and it's progress that we need to continue. And, speak out when we hear it. A lot of times I bite my tongue. And, I need to speak out and to show that, it's okay to, and you need to. And then what the church is doing with Alaska Natives is great. It's gonna take time. And it's one of the comments on the message was, we have fought so hard to be where we are today. We're glad you didn't say anything, because that would just put us further behind. And that's sad, but it's true. When I was telling my husband that, what we were talking about, and there's a couple stores I won't go into downtown. And he said, well, remember the time that, and that was recent. And I was ready to buy something. I'm like, I'm not gonna support your business. So I think just talking about it will help us, help us heal too, and help.
So when we talk about whiteness, you've experienced the whites maligning Native Americans. What is whiteness, even to us? What privileges do we have? Okay, let's go with that one. What privileges do we have as white people that Native Americans don't have, that blacks don't have, that others of them?
I don't know anything about privilege, but maybe even for distortion, I'm looking at, I'm reading a book called Education for Extermination. And it's a history of the boarding schools. And I typed this out for a friend of mine because I was like, man, to me, this is an example of when we think about whiteness and how whites like Protestant, American, have distorted the gospel. And we live in this same kind of mindset today that we champion as an idol. We've all talked about the Protestant work ethic and things like that. So in the book, this is according to white progressive thought in the late 1800s. So progressive thought, he's talking about progressives who felt like indigenous people could be civilized, through education. As opposed to people that just wanted to slaughter Native people. So I'm quoting from the book, tribal society had somehow gotten matters all wrong. Or actually, this is right from the book, but this might be a quote from somebody at the time, so I'd have to go back for sure to look at it. But anyway, tribal society had somehow gotten matters all wrong, that I would put in quotes. Rather than operating on the progressive principle that the whole society stood benefit when the individual's acquisitive instincts were given their full play, acquisitive, right, to acquire things. Tribal life, on the other hand, was rooted in the idea that the welfare of the community depended on the individual curbing material desires. So here's this progressive thought saying that really, it's the individual and the pursuit of things that is to be highlighted here to
Civilized.
Yes, right. This communal sense, okay? Whereas a Protestant American measured an individual's worth by his capacity to accumulate wealth, an Indian did so by what he gave away. Which of those in our present context sounds more like the way of Christ? Okay, and we can look at that now, but we have all been enculturated in that mindset, whether, and to disavow that or to call that out or whatever. I mean, that's our capitalist system, right? I mean, and so that's kind of that form of that's whiteness, that it's just all around us. We can't really name it. And what happens when we talk about anything other than that, it sounds like, Marxism or communism or, socialism or something that, we can't, the idea of sharing with one another. And anyway, get off my horse now, but that just struck me, and it's like, yeah, it's part of ingrained in our culture that we're not even fully aware of.
I think whiteness means to me, I have a privilege to some extent.
And what is the privilege?
The privilege is I can walk into any situation and not have to worry about what anybody thinks about me. That I have acceptance. And, I have been in situations where I've not been accepted, where I haven't really fit.
Mhm.
And I don't like that feeling. So it doesn't always that way, but for the most part,
Yeah.
I can go into a business meeting, I can go into a church setting, I can go into a community event. I don't think about it,
And that's one of the things, we
Right.
don't think about
Don't
the
think
fact
about
that we are white. Mhm.
And I guess I've always tried to be welcoming to other people, whether they're the color of the skin or their economic situation. I always tried to teach my kids to do that, but still, it doesn't dismiss what I get. I get the privilege of being that, and that's what whiteness. I think that's what whiteness means to me.
Well, you can walk into white businesses, white meetings, right? Right. What about
But even
BIPOC meetings
but
or churches?
But when I was working at Rainier, I was marketing logs for 2 or 3 different Alaska Native corporations, groups. Just by walking in, I had the knowledge, I was the
Yeah.
I was the
you were
guy.
expert.
I was the guy.
Looked at it
And, and so, it didn't have anything to do with, it should be about my expertise and how my marketing skills were worth the beans or whatever. And that's what I tried to talk about, but it still just gives you a platform that I feel, and I don't know, because I'm not white, and I feel other people have to work harder to get that platform. What I see.
Yeah, kind of thinking about it. So aren't there elements of kind of, I don't know what words to use, but prevailing, dominance, must win? Is that kind of part of what it means to be white? I wonder.
When you asked that question, I had to figure out, in my head, I had to say, I'm not sure I could have told you what whiteness was years ago, because I have learned by comparing what I have to what others have. If I'm not listening to people and I don't hear anything else, blinders, whatever you want to call them, you don't know what you have until you hear someone else's story. And when you start hearing how other people live, then I can begin to say, wow, I have privileges. Wow, people respect me. It's really not about me. It's about a community of people. And I don't think I would have known those things without being able to, I guess, listen first off.
So, some point during the week, somebody showed a little cartoon, and there was a frog on a lily pad, and the frog calling down into the the water. There's two fish down there, and it's like, hey, how's the water today? And then the fish is like looking up like, what's water? Whiteness is having the secret code of how to interact in society. We don't have to shift or interpret our thinking as we interact with others. We just sort of assume, and that, I think we talked before about code. Did we talk about code switching at some point, right? So, that, say a person of color switching back, from, language or imagery and things, and talking with somebody else of color versus among whites. You don't have to, and having to make that, that shift to interact.
We don't hear, at least in the white world, we do not hear issues like your friends experienced. We don't hear put downs, the racist kinds of comments to us as white. Maybe we would if we were in another culture, but living in a white society, we're free from all the racist comments. We're free to accumulate wealth and pass it on. We're free to live where we live. And we don't have freeways being put through our neighborhoods. There's so much. But let's put another word in here. Anti-racist. I don't know if we've really even talked about that word in this class. But what would it mean to be anti-racist?
Well, to me, anti has a negative connotation a lot. And so when you say anti-racist, I can't help but think, oh, well, so these are radicals who are against people who are trying to be hateful or something, but so anti that it's not done nice, and that can't be done. But I'm not sure that's what you're getting at.
Probably not. But I think that idea might be prevalent as we face that word. Anti-racist might be the extremists who are out there trying to do something to make us different.
Is this the same as I don't see color?
I don't think so, because I think I don't see color doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are differences in our colors.
Right.
Let me see if I have a quote here. Okay, there's a quote. The anti-racism movement needs white leaders, people who are pointing out whiteness at every turn and helping other white people to see it too. anti-racist is what, by that definition, by what this author is saying. What's anti-racist? Simply pointing out the advantages we have as being white, as being white. Pointing out the advantages we have.
I don't get it.
Okay.
Well, I think you're kind of saying, like what I said, in that I couldn't put a finger on whiteness until I was able to hear other stories. So here we've got somebody who's pointing out to whites their advantages, right?
Yeah.
And saying, that's not right. There's some things we need to do to make our whiteness different.
Yeah, and exactly how different, we don't, I'm not sure.
And, you know, I wanna, something about advantages kind of makes me ruffles my feathers a little bit or something. That I think it's not just that, because I think that, I think from this perspective, having conversations with people, and you talk about, you know, well, somebody might say, well, you know, you have all these advantages because you're white, you don't understand it. And they'd be like, I don't get it. I don't have any advantages or whatever. It might be like, if you think about, say, poor, uneducated white people have pretty much the same, I mean, there is that advantage, if you will, of being white in terms of how they might, you know, in some level, how they're treated, but economically and everything, they share a lot in common, right, with all poor people, you know? And so I think I would say, I wouldn't throw out advantage, but I might, you know, add even just some of the assumptions that we make as being,
Okay.
you know, white. And again, I'm thinking from this documentary that we were watching, that this one professor was pointing out how in Barbados they had the laws basically were you know, they had slaves, and that Christians were to be treated differently, right? So it was kind of like if you're a Christian, then you would be otherwise kind of Christian versus sort of heathen or pagan or something, that, you know, to be treated differently. Like, and that, so the idea that you would enslave a Christian, okay? And that later, some of those same laws were basically changed to, instead of Christian, to white, as you know, slaves became Christianized, you know, and accepted the gospel and so on. So, you know, it's kind of like that, you know, that's the thing about whiteness. That's not, you know, I think there's a lie about apartheid, you know, being that, you know, in time you could become white, you know, you can enjoy the privileges of being white. But you never can, because there's always some color to you, and that's the thing that's going to distinguish you as other. I don't know if any of that makes any sense. But yeah, so that there are these hidden kinds of things that, you know, it's almost like the idea of always moving the goal line.
I like the comments of not only the advantages of whiteness, but the assumptions that are connected with all of that. Because we need to look at that. There is a quote here though. So, unpacking racism requires both introspection and action, a radical self-awareness, and a willingness to move into a new space. As we live into a new way to be white in the world, as we work to dismantle our sickened social constructs and build a healthy moral whiteness, we will move through a non-linear process of inner and outer work, of mistakes, backslides, and spirals, of new layers of yet more work to be done. Let me
Was it
put
one
a
sentence?
little, yeah, I think,
So it sounds like the
two,
Apostle
two
Paul.
sentences, yeah, two sentences, but let's just put it a little differently. From the class or from your life, what are you learning about yourself in terms of racism? What are you learning about yourself and your racism?
I don't know if this fits underneath it, but, I wonder how. If you white, I mean, let me just say it like that. Went, onto the reservation, is it different for you if you go to a reservation or to a Black community or to a different community? Is there a difference? Can you feel the difference?
What's your experience?
Okay, I don't feel, I know I feel out of place, but it's not, it's different. It's not, you don't have the same level of comfort. I think if you're, in a surrounded by, yeah, trying to think, because, traveling, I go to Japan, I feel different, obviously. I'm one of the few white guys walking around, but I don't carry all that cultural stuff in my head because I don't, I know a few Asian people, they're fine, but when I go, but when you go into a Black community, for example, I don't go into Black communities, and suddenly I'm very aware of how I don't fit here, right? And so, yeah, you carry that stuff in there, at least I do, and then you have to try to relax and just try to be a person with other people. When you just grow up in white, I mean, Aberdeen was pretty white.
So was Longview.
Yeah. So, and we had a reservation, but it was at the ones here much closer to town. Yeah, it was different.
So going into a different culture for you, you feel different.
Yes.
Sometimes you feel like you're invading somebody else's space. You go into the reservation or the Black community, I'm not at home here,
I know at times, if I'm walking down the street in Seattle and a large group of Black men are coming, I will be hesitant. I will be hesitant, scared, uncertain. That's part of my racism.
I find that, in certain settings, like there's something shifts, like, that my awareness or some energy level changes to, because it challenges some of the basic assumptions that I have. And how do I, like, going onto a reservation or something like that, how can I be more aware and be respectful and interact in this setting? Because there's assumptions that I make in Port Angeles or whatever, on day to day that are mindless, right? And, so maybe even something like, holding the door open for somebody or something like that. Right? Those little, there's a couple notes I want to throw in. I think we kind of touched a little bit about there. Paul and Sarah were saying that, we talk about how whiteness is present in society, and we discuss justice in that context. How has whiteness impacted the church, and how do we address that? Maybe we've touched on that a little bit, but the next piece is there a difference in moving within the space of another community if historically you have been the race that was the one with power dominion versus people of color how they feel walking through white spaces.
You know, in Africa, I have been in situations where I was the only white person, or among hundreds of especially kids, maybe very few of us being white. I think, though, that my whiteness comes out in a sense that I was being looked up to. And that in itself is not right, just because of my skin.
And not because of the position you had as a
No.
director or something, or?
Yeah, not. So, I don't know, there's a lot. I do want to read two more things though. Martin Luther King Jr., you talked about him today. The beloved community. A global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. In the beloved community, international disputes will be resolved by peaceful conflict resolution and reconciliation of adversaries instead of military power. Love and trust will triumph over fear and hatred. Peace and justice will prevail over war and military conflict. Question is, how is Jesus the embodiment of the beloved community that Martin Luther King talks about? How is he the embodiment of that?
I think by reading and watching what Jesus does during the stories that we have of him, have to be internalized. And then it has to be, I think for me, I have to see people doing those things to help me figure out how I can be more like Jesus. It's good to read it and see it and that way, but I feel like going places or trying to engage or whatever things I'm trying to do to be a better person, when I find somebody that is a better person, that's somebody I want to try to, I don't want to put them on a pedestal, but I want to learn from them and I want to listen.
So in many ways, Jesus was and is that beloved community. He embodies that. And Martin Luther King, I'm sure, ends up writing about that because of who he was in relationship with Christ. We probably need to ask the question, and this is going to be a rhetorical question that maybe we can think about. You know, how is the church the beloved community? Is it the church? Is the church the beloved community? And I know time is out, so I want to read one more. The reverse prayer of St. Francis. Dear Lord, make me a channel of disturbance. Where there is apathy, let me provoke. Where there is compliance, let me bring questioning. Where there is silence, may I be a voice. Where there is too much comfort and too little action, grant disruption. Where there are doors closed and hearts locked, grant me a willingness to listen. When laws dictate and pain is overlooked, when tradition speaks louder than need, Grant that I may seek rather to do justice than to talk about it. Disturb us, O Lord. To be with, as well as for the alien. Wait a minute. Disturb us, O Lord, to be with, as well as for the alienated, to love the unlovable, as well as the lovely. Lord, make me a channel of disturbance. And John Lewis. Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. Get in trouble. And this is where we are so afraid of getting people against us or disrupting the status quo that we remain silent. But let's pray. Gracious God, I thank you that you are present and you're working even in this group. Thank you that we have many different voices here and that we learn from each other as well as from you, oh Lord, in your name. Amen. Thanks for being a class, part of the class.
Oh, it's so good to be out.
Thanks, Dan.
You know,